Hi everyone. We don't have the chair yet, so we can elect a chair for this meeting only or until Councillor Nichols arrives. So any nominations?
Volunteers? Okay.
Yeah, is that seconded?
Yeah.
Seconded. Okay, thank you.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm Councillor Lee Bridgen. I guess deputy chair for this meeting only, or until Councillor Nichols arrives. I'll just run through the housekeeping announcements. So, please wear a face mask until seated. Maintain a sensible social distance when moving around the chamber, and use the hand sanitizer provided. The induction loop is now operative. Members and officers, please remember to switch microphones on and speak directly into the microphone, and switch off again after speaking. Reporting officers using Teams, please switch cameras and microphones on when speaking and off when finished. Use the hands up icon in Teams to indicate questions and comments. The meeting this evening will be live streamed to the public, and a recording of the meeting will be available on the Council's website within 24 hours of the meeting. Please put mobile phones on silent or turned off. Okay. So we'll move on to the first item of the agenda, which is apologies for absence.
None, Chair.
Okay, thank you. So the next item on the agenda is to confirm the minutes of the last meeting, which were included in the agenda pack. Does anybody have any comments in relation to the minutes? No, so those minutes are confirmed. Thank you. Moving on to item 3 of the agenda, which is disclosures of interest. Okay, no disclosures of interest. Moving swiftly on to item 4, which is any urgent business. No urgent business. Okay, so again, we'll move on to the next item of the agenda, which is reference from committees and other bodies, which I suspect there are none.
No.
Okay, so no references from other committees or other bodies. So we'll move on to the reports. Agenda item 6, which is further information on pollutants from flue gas treatment, hazardous materials sent for final disposal, and mixed dry recyclables sent for to the Far East.
Thank you, Chair. If I go to the first one, the question of materials, members asked a number of questions which are on page 8, so 10 questions, which what we've done is we've put the responses in the report. As far as the question on pollutants from the flue gas treatment, that's contained in points 20 and 20 to 22, and that is on page 14. There's also a link to some of the Great Moor emissions reports under 18. With regard to the question about materials sent to small specialist land sites, that is also answered in the report. If members want to delve into that any more deeply about the actual tonnages and the materials we can get extracts from the energy from waste environmental permit and find that. We've provided quite a lot of links to the EFW facility in terms of flue gas and otherwise. So if members have any further queries. And in terms of the specific question about the materials going to the Royden group, we're still working our way through the Environment Agency chain of custody just to confirm if any materials from Luton have went elsewhere, and we'll come back to you with that information if any materials have been exported at all.
Thank you. Any questions from the floor? Any comments? Okay, thank you. Okay, so we'll move on to the next item, which is item 7, response to members' queries from April 2022.
In part, that was some of the questions I've just given you, of the responses. As I say, from the visit and others, we've included all of the links in the various reports, the previous reports, and if members have got any particular outstanding queries, if they can let us know and we'll respond to them directly, either before the next meeting or in the report for the next meeting.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or comments, Councillor Franks?
Yeah, just referring to paragraph 8, Sean. You're saying here that incineration doesn't emit methane. Is that because, I mean, we all know methane is a highly inflammable gas. Is that because the methane is actually burned off in the incineration process? And what does that produce? It must produce something in the way of emissions.
Yeah, Councillor, the methane from residual waste is usually a product of its biodegradable nature. So a bit like your compost bin, and that tends to come from landfill sites where it's entombed, and then the right conditions for temperature and moisture. And one of the products is methane, which in most modern landfills is taken off and used to generate electricity. Because the energy from waste plant is a treatment, a combustion technology, it doesn't have that degradation, that composing time. From the time it's tipped into the feed pit, it's usually within a week or so at the very latest that it's put into the system. So most times it's within 48 hours. So there's no methane generated from the decomposition because it's a treatment process rather than a closed landfill. So hence no methane.
Thank you. Understood.
Any other questions or comments? No. Okay. Thank you, Dan. Thanks for that. Okay. Moving on to the next item of the agenda, which is item 8. The counter argument on incineration from UKWin, which is a presentation by the national coordinator of the UKWin. I think that's there. Yep.
Right. Good evening. Thank you very much, Chair. We're in the process of setting up our PowerPoint presentation so that you can see it. Just a moment. Can you see it now, Chair?
Not yet, no.
Okay, right, we'll soon be there. Right, yes, you tell me what to do, Josh.
There's a share button.
This is the share tray,
Right.
and when I click on it, it says screen share. We're nearly there, Chair. So thank you for bearing with me here, and thank you for your introduction. We tend to call ourselves UKWin. We're deliberately playing off the idea that our members are winners, so to speak. Can you hear us now?
Yes, we can hear you, and we can see your presentation on the screen now.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Councillor Bridgen. Yes, indeed, we are the United Kingdom Without Incineration Network, a clear giveaway there, and of our position. And my name is Shlomo Doan. I'm the National Coordinator of UKWin. We were founded in 2007, so we've been at it for about 15 years, and many of our members have 20 or more years experience. We are the only UK-wide network supporting local anti-incineration campaigns and campaigners. We're currently working with about 50 active local groups, but over the last 15 years, we've probably worked with 200. With our members, we've helped to prevent more than 100 incinerators from coming into existence. We work and continue to work to inform the waste and resource sector discussions and policies from the government, and I'll say a bit about the direction of travel that the government is going at the moment. We exist in part to counter greenwash, and we do so not with our own rhetoric, but with fact-based evidence. So you will see basically anything that I'm sharing with you, you can ask afterwards what our source of that information was, and we should be able to hook you up with that source. And much of the information that we will be presenting is already available through our website, ukwin.org.uk, and that includes an interactive map and table of all existing, prevented, and potential incinerators throughout the UK. So what I thought would be useful would be to begin with to talk about what is the composition of this residual waste that either goes to landfill or incineration. And I'd prepared this slide. Then when I was reading the agenda pack, I noticed the response to basically paragraph 24, which is on page 15 of your agenda pack, which suggested that in the UK, more than 15 million tons of household waste is sent to landfill each year, with Luton sending over 10,000 tons from household waste curbside collections. Well, we did our own calculations, and it seems to us that it would be more like 3 million tons, not 15 million tons a year that is sent to landfill. There are more than 13 million tons that were incinerated, but it was 3 million tons a year and falling year on year. And of course, there's currently around 4 million tons of additional incineration capacity that is only just in construction or coming online shortly. So really, we'll soon be in a situation where there is more incineration capacity than there is municipal waste to burn, even if all of the residual municipal waste was sent to incineration. And of course, the answer to question 24, or the paragraph 24, referred to household waste. Household waste is only a portion of the waste collected by local authorities, known as local authority collected waste. But let us turn our focus now to the residual waste that we've been talking about, and the government. So this is the resource, whoops, this is the, sorry about that. This is the resource efficiency and waste reduction targets that were only just produced by the government for consultation. They are estimating that much of what is in the municipal waste stream, in the residual waste stream, is readily recyclable. They're talking about 75, 76% readily recyclable or potentially recyclable, and nearly 92% that could either be recycled or that could be substituted with a material that could be recycled or composted. So, and of the remaining 8.1%, much of that is not useful for incineration feedstock because it includes, for example, ceramics, which doesn't burn, so it doesn't. You can't get any energy out of burning ceramics, etc. Fine dust has problems with incineration, etc. So trammel fines, etc. So there's actually far more incineration capacity than there is genuinely residual waste to burn that couldn't have been recycled or substituted. We then move on to a consideration of the adverse climate impacts of waste incineration. This is an area of speciality for UKWin. We've published a number of leading studies, both about the adverse impacts of waste incineration and also about how to measure the adverse impacts of incineration and how to compare it with landfill, etc. And I'm happy to provide links to those, but simply put, if you go to ukwin.org.uk/climate, there'll be a wealth of resources there that are relevant for some of the agenda items that are scheduled for discussion later this evening. As you can see here, when we compare incineration, for example, to combined cycle gas turbine, or CCGT, we see that the energy produced from burning gas comes, if you like, at a cost of 340 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. Coal is associated with 870 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour, and generally speaking, an average UK incinerator is around 800 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. As you would expect with an average, some are higher and some are lower. All UK incinerators are well over the CCGT comparator. And if you because of the feedstock, if what you do is you compost the biodegradable material or send it to an anaerobic digestion facility, and you're left with primarily plastic, the energy produced from burning plastic is equivalent to more than 1,000 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. So it's obvious that the Committee on Climate Change and others who are sensitive to climate issues have advised local authorities to carefully consider the emissions from incineration plants. Their primary focus is on fossil emissions. In other words, the emissions that come from the burning of various forms of plastic, including textiles that are made from synthetic fibers, as well as hard plastics and soft plastics, film, etc. In a net zero world, EFW facilities are likely to be significantly higher carbon than other forms of energy production. So obviously, as coal is phased out, as we move from CCGT to solar and wind power, then we are decarbonizing the electricity supply. And of course, as we can progressively decarbonize, then incinerators are the outlier. They are the very, if you like, the highest carbon sources of energy, and therefore not desirable from a climate point of view. one point before I move on to the next slide, and that is that the small quantity, the 15 or 42 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour for solar and wind, that's not actually while they're generating that power. That is just an allocation for the actual building of the solar panels and the wind turbines. We haven't done those same, we haven't added on the climate impacts of constructing incinerators, which would be vast. That tends to happen over a 3-year period. But we wanted just not to zero rate wind and solar. So although it's not exactly comparable, the way that we've presented it makes wind and solar look worse than they really are. Okay, so earlier I referred to the direction of travel of government. I talked about how UKWin has as part of its role to influence the direction of travel for the government, and that is why, although UKWin is a not-for-profit organization, we are not eligible to be a registered charity because we exist to influence government policy, and we're honest about that. And we are optimistic about what the government has been doing with the suggestions that we've been sending. So a lot of these ideas are ideas that we've been putting forward for a while, and the government is listening with increasing attention over the past 3 to 5 years. So the government themselves, and these are all quotes now from the Environment Act Targets Impact Analysis, and the section of that relates to waste reduction. You can see there the link to those. And this is part of a live government consultation about the targets that accompany the Environment Act. So government intervention will aim to divert waste away from landfill and incineration. So clearly the government is saying that their aim is not to send more waste to incineration, but to divert waste away from incineration. So material that is already going to incinerators should not be going to incineration, according to the government. Higher levels of waste segregation mean that different types of waste will need to be sent to different treatment facilities instead of all going to landfill or incineration. So to preempt a question that you may be asking about what should we do with the waste otherwise, the answer, as the government suggests, is greater segregation. She who sorts wins. The more that you sort your material, and you can get some illustration of this from imagining a large pile of old computers. If it's a big mountain of old computers, nobody's interested. It's just rubbish. It's just waste. They don't want to sort through it. But if somebody goes through and removes the microchips from all of those computers, then they will have some real value. They can be reused, etc. The hard drives may be able to be reused, etc. And the difference, it's the same pile, but one has been sorted and one has not. So segregation is the key. Disposal methods at the bottom of the waste hierarchy, such as incineration, such as landfill incineration and refuse-derived fuels, are associated with higher greenhouse gas emissions. So this is, again, reinforcing UKWin's message by the government. Reducing the levels of waste being disposed of via these residual waste methods will lead to an increase in reuse, repair, remanufacture, and will move England's waste system to a more circular economy. And I'm sure you've heard the phrase circular economy before, and I'm sure that you can appreciate that incineration is a leakage from the circular economy. It's part of the old linear economy, take, make, destroy. It's the destroy bit. And obviously with a circular economy, more materials will cycle around the economy more frequently. And the idea is to phase out incineration in order to come up with a fully circular economy. So government policy is now about burning less and recycling more, which echoes the Luton waste strategy of waste less, recycle more. The Environment Bill is now the Environment Act, so it is now law. England now has a target to recycle 65% of municipal waste by 2035, and all parts of England are expected to contribute to that. There is a recognition that cities can have more difficulty because of blocks of flats, etc. But towns and countryside, they're expected to make up the difference and to have recycling rates of 65% and higher. And this is being achieved in some areas. The UK government is proposing to halve the quantity of material going to incineration and landfill by 2042 relative to a 2019 base year. So they're looking for progressive reduction of material going for incineration. Earlier, when I referred to the difference between the roughly 3 million tons going to landfill and the roughly 13 million tons going to incineration, that's roughly an 80-20 split. So at the moment, there's a great deal of residual material that's going to either incineration or landfill. And the idea is that the government is looking for it to be less on both fronts. They say that this would represent a recycling rate of around 70 to 75% by 2042. And the UK government is also proposing to include incineration in the emissions trading scheme to reflect the adverse climate impacts of incineration. So what would all of this, in particular inclusion in the emissions trading scheme, mean for Luton Borough Council? Well, sadly, Luton is associated with very poor recycling rates. You may well be more familiar with the local news leader website, and you can see this headline again being critical, sadly, of the residents. I would say that the blame, or if you like, the responsibility should not be shouldered only by Luton residents. There's clearly a role for the Borough Council to work together with the residents to improve recycling rates. According to government figures, in 2020-2021, Luton Borough Council recycled or composted only about 28% of the waste that was thrown out, and incinerated nearly half, more than 44,000 tons. Luton Borough Council sent material for incineration both to Greatmoor and to Ellington incinerators, as you know, both run by a company now called FCC. When I started, they were the Waste Recycling Group, or WRG, but now they are Spanish owned. So let's just have a few words about Greatmoor and Ellington. I know that you've got some good links and you can use those links, and hopefully those links will match up with the information that we have here, but just a word of warning. These figures relate to calendar year. It's sometimes a little bit tricky to correlate the calendar years with the years that FCC writes its own reports, not the reports that they send to the Environment Agency, but the reports that they make available online. So I'll warn you about that in advance. But looking at the FCC's submission to the Environment Agency's pollution inventory for both of these incinerators, in the year 2020, from January to the end of December, the Greatmoor incinerator released more than 277,000 tons of CO2, and this is FCC reporting it themselves, and 315 tons of nitrogen oxides, or NOx, and other pollutants such as nickel, chromium, mercury, etc. So when you're wondering what is coming out alongside the steam, what is that other 1 or 2%? This begins to capture what that other 1 or 2% is, and the nitrous oxides, etc. Similarly, Ellington released 370,000 tons, and obviously they've rounded here, of CO2 into the atmosphere just in that 1 year, and 368 tons of nitrous oxides. This is massive because, of course, these are gases. These are light substances. So a ton is quite a lot, alongside nickel, chromium, mercury, particulate matter, etc. So what are the implications if incineration is, as the government is currently proposing, included in the emissions trading scheme? What will this mean for Luton? Well, incinerators typically release around 1 ton of CO2 per ton of waste incinerated, about half of which is fossil CO2. That means it derives from burning plastic. If incineration is included in the UK emissions trading scheme, it could give rise to substantial financial costs for Luton Borough Council if the council continues to send 44,000 tonnes per annum of material for incineration. That would equate, if we just take half of that, to about 22,000 tonnes of fossil CO2. Now, because the trading scheme is a bit like a stock market, the amount can go up or down, a bit like the old LATS system that never quite worked. And historically, the cost of fossil carbon has gone over £80. It was £78, I think, the last time I checked. At that rate of about £80 per tonne, and of course there's nothing stopping it going up to £100 a tonne and nothing stopping it dropping to £60 a tonne. But at that rate, Luton could be responsible for paying the Treasury £1.76 million a year, each and every year, over and above what is already being paid to the incinerator operators. Those operators will not pick up the tab for Luton Borough Council, because then they would have to pick up the tab for everybody. And in all of the waste contracts that we've read and all of the ones that we're aware of, the risk, the financial risk of changes to government policy that would result either in an inclusion in an incineration tax or a carbon tax or emissions trading scheme, etc., those risks are borne by the local authorities. So you can get confirmation from FCC, but I imagine that they would confirm that if incineration were to be included in emissions trading scheme, and that they wouldn't pick up the bill. So obviously, investing in the top tiers of the waste hierarchy helps to reduce the financial risk associated with inclusion in the emissions trading scheme. I'll end on a positive note, and that is that for every 10,000 tons of material, you could create 2 jobs through incineration and landfill. You could create 115 jobs through recycling and more than 400 jobs for repair. So something for Luton councillors to consider. I'll leave it at that, though, of course, as you know, I'm enjoying the topic and I'm very happy to answer any questions arising.
Thank you for that useful and interesting report. Any questions from the floor? I'll go with Councillor Franks first and Councillor Win.
Yep, thank you, Shlomo. Don't go away, please, because we do have questions for you. But my first question is for Sean, please. The presentation says that Luton recycled or composted 28% of its household waste. Would you dispute that figure, Sean?
No, that was down from the previous year of 36%, because that was the first 6 months plus of the pandemic. So the civic community sites were shut. We brought in the green waste and various other measures, a lot of side waste where everybody was working from home. So nationally, there was quite a big reduction, and particularly in an urban authority like Luton, where the 2 civic community sites do take a lot of tonnage and recycling. They have 60% plus recycling. So yeah, it had a big effect on us.
So it's 36% the highest that Luton has ever achieved?
No, we've been close to 39%. The first year we went fortnightly.
Okay, thank you for that. So do you want me to carry on? So I've got a few questions. Going backwards through your presentation then, Shlomo, you say higher levels of waste segregation would make a big difference.
Yes.
As part of your role, is your organisation lobbying the government to fund local authorities to enable them to segregate more and do more sorting?
Well, simply put, no. We leave it to, there are quite a few organizations that represent, even that represent recycling officers at local authorities. So they are best placed to negotiate with government in relation to payment. We've heard promises, and obviously we've worked with MPs who have secured promises in relation to funding. I remember Michael Gove making some promises to Caroline Lucas in relation to funding of recycling schemes, etc. And I know that there is funding available, but no, we haven't specifically lobbied government on that point.
Thank you for that. Going on to your mostly recyclable slide, clearly, if this was easy to achieve, it would be well on the way to being done by now. Do you have any evidence at all as to why it isn't? I mean, is it the packaging industry? Are the costs of the alternative materials that you say could be used higher than the ones they're currently using? Have you got any evidence to give us a clue as to why it's not happening?
It's an excellent question, Councillor, and a lot of it, in my understanding, is down to a lack of joined up thinking. So those that have responsibility for designing products are tasked with, they have a very specific brief and they work to their brief. And if their brief does not include an element of sensitivity to what will happen, if you like, the end of the life of that product, then they won't be designing that product with end of life in mind. And this is exactly why the government is introducing extended producer responsibility, so that those who are producing these products are mindful of the end of life or final destinations, or indeed recyclability, or indeed reusability and repairability of their products. So we've lived through several generations of products moving from those that we could fix ourselves to those that, although we couldn't fix, there was someone in the village who could fix it, to those that had to then be brought in by specialists to be fixed, to those that it's cheaper not to fix it but just to replace it. And obviously this has gone on for decades, and it needs reversing. If you like, we've reached a point in the linear economy where the damage being done has been recognized, and now it's taking a while to turn the ship. So I don't know if that helps address the question, but it gives at least one insight into how we got to where we are now.
Yeah, thank you for that, Shlomo. What it does do, your answer does help to explain the problem and help me to understand it a little better. From what you're saying, it sounds like it's an education problem, and perhaps another job for UKWin to put on their list for the future.
Yes, point taken, Councillor.
Yeah, thank you. Well, just one more question, and then I'll leave you alone. You queried the statement in paragraph 24 on page 15 of our papers, that 15 million tonnes of household waste is sent to landfill, and you claimed it was 3 million, and
Yes.
Unless I've misunderstood what you were saying, 13 million tonnes go for incineration. Could you give us a source for that information, please?
Yes, happily. Let me show you the spreadsheet. Just a moment. Have I stopped sharing? Right. Okay. Let's try sharing. Right. So do I have to bring it up first?
Basically, you share the screen, you don't share the window.
Ah, okay. It's different.
So it's one.
So I have to bring it up. So it's this one here.
If you
Great. And now are we sharing? So
no,
great.
it's not shared. You just put.
Right. Okay. So I brought it up. So
then you
now
share screen
I
one.
select share
Then you have to select screen one.
screen one.
That's two. That's one.
That's one.
And press share.
And press share. Okay.
Then you switch it. Then you need to switch
And then put it
on
down.
screen one. Yep.
Right. Okay. Great. So here you go. So thank you very much, Josh. So in terms of the sources, what we've done, because the statement made related to the UK or the United Kingdom as a whole, but because the statistics are generally speaking gathered at a nation by nation basis, what we've had to do is go through a process of and let's just try and get it all to be the same font, etc. Right, good. We went through a process of looking at the amounts for each country. Now, because we were focusing on household waste, but although Scotland did have household and similar as a category, generally speaking, the quantity of waste was reported as local authority collected waste. Local authority collected waste, or LACW, includes household waste, but also includes waste from businesses, etc. So it's a larger category. Nevertheless, it's indicative. And what we found was that there were, for the year 2020 to 2021, because it was the financial year, according to DEFRA, and we've got the file here, the local authority regional spreadsheet, etc., and we've got the URL. There were a total of about 25.89 million tons arising, of which roughly 2 million was landfilled and roughly 12.46 incinerated, with about 10.7 million recycled. And that means a landfill of 7.8% in total, but 14% of the residual material, whereas 86% of the residual material was incinerated. And then we did a similar exercise for Wales, which was about 1.5 million tons arising, and you can see the split between 72 and 42 there. In Scotland, they gave figures for landfill and incineration, and you can see in Scotland there is more landfill than incineration. In Wales, it's slightly different, and in England, again, far more incinerated than landfilled. The Northern Ireland figures, again, roughly a 50-50 split in terms of what went to landfill and what went to incineration. But you'll notice that neither Scotland nor Northern Ireland had even 1 million tons, or Wales had 1 million tons, let alone. So when you add them all, the 2 million from England and the contributions from Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland left a total landfill of just over 3 million tons, whereas incineration well over 13 million. So I hope you're glad you asked, but that's the more thorough answer to the question.
Yep, thank you very much indeed for that, Shlomo. It's clear to me, one thing is absolutely clear, and that is the difficulty of comparing figures when they're based on a different basis. When, as you say, Scotland and England, for example, don't use the same formula. It must make it difficult. Thank you for that.
For sure. Yes. No, I quite enjoy talking about these topics. So no apologies at all necessary.
Councillor Wynne.
Good evening. Thank you for that. A lot of what you've said has been very much thought-provoking. You put a headline figure. I'll start with something very general to begin with. You put a headline figure of how much it was going to cost Luton. You quoted the figure, I think, of 1.76 million.
Correct. Yes.
The biggest question that poses to me is if we dedicate ourselves to doing a lot more of the sorting, which is one of the key features you were talking about, is that going to cost us more than the 1.76 million or less?
Yes, an excellent question. I think simply put, some of the costs would qualify, if you like, as an investment. So if the sorting facilities were not already readily available to the Borough Council, then building a facility might well cost more than 1.6 million, but it would not cost you 1.6 million every year, year in, year out. So it is a real choice between budgeting for 1.76 million every year or potentially budgeting for a bit more in 1 or 2 years and then getting those costs down significantly after that. It's certainly something that can be discussed with your waste officers. But of course, the alternative is not to build your own facilities, which would be costly, but to use services provided by others, including potentially FCC. If you were to renegotiate your contract, you might be able to get an arrangement whereby they are not taking your residual material for incineration, but taking it for sorting and thereby greatly reducing either landfill tax or emissions trading scheme charges.
If I can come back on that just for a moment, the biggest issue is I understand about what might be an upfront cost of some sorting type process, but there's also a significant labour content. There's also a significant investment in any form of automation for sorting, which is extremely complex to sort mechanically. I've done work on artificial vision systems for selecting materials and put those in France, for example. But the technology is actually not really there to do a full sorting of a lot of this material, as far as I can tell. And a lot of it would have to be people-based. Is that your view as well?
Right. So I'll put my hand up and say this is not an area of expertise for me. My understanding, of course, is that the idea that it is something that will be more labor intensive can again be seen as an investment in the local workforce and something that provides jobs, and there could be a net benefit, particularly in this very difficult economic climate, to be employing more people. So that's not necessarily a bad thing, but of course it is a cost, and there would need to be a proper costing of all the different options available to the council for your consideration. But I think generally speaking, there's a combination. I mean, let's look at the most successful recyclers. So for example, Wales. One of the things that Wales does and does well is known as curbside sorting. So because one of the big issues for Luton Borough Council and for any council in England is contamination, And because contamination doesn't always mean what you think it does, it doesn't mean that it's suddenly radioactive or indeed that it's been ruined beyond any recognition. What it means is that non-contract waste has been combined with contract waste. And sometimes non-contract waste could be glass, or it could be carrier bags. And sometimes carrier bags could be mixed with other potentially recyclable plastics. And then that is considered contamination. So in Wales, what happens is you don't just, if you like, your bin isn't just emptied into the back of a machine. It's actually sorted as the people who collect the material that has been thrown away, they sort it as they collect it, curbside sorting. And so that has the effect of virtually eliminating contamination. Obviously, there is a financial cost to that. Obviously, it goes slower, so it means you need more crews and potentially more and certainly different style vehicles. So again, it requires an investment, but it is another way of going about doing the segregating that doesn't involve centralization where you're paying the overheads of a large materials recovery facility or something like that. So there are a range of options. And again, I'm sure that it's a subject that your waste officer will be well versed and well familiar with.
I just come back on that. At one stage, my son lived in Brentford in London, and they did curbside recycling and sorting in the vehicles. It was an extremely slow and sometimes quite smelly process. And it used to clog up the streets around where he lived for hours on collection day. It was, to be honest, a bit of a nightmare. You could hardly get up the street. So that's...
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend it from London, that's for sure.
And I believe Brentford have stopped doing it.
I think you're right.
But if I look at what you said, it seems to me that there would be a huge level of investment needed for a council like Luton to be able to follow down some of the lines you're suggesting. Now, going on to another question for a moment. Where do we look in Europe for a good example of how to do it properly?
Ironically, actually, we would look to Wales. I mean, in terms of organizationally speaking, there is Zero Waste Europe, and Zero Waste Europe is working to, as the name suggests, move from a situation where there is residual waste to a circular economy where there is literally zero waste, or at least below 10%. No country has achieved that yet. Belgium is good. I've been to Flanders, and they have been achieving a recycling rate of around 75% for the last decade. So if there was a part of Europe that could be recommended, it would probably be Flanders. But of course, there are a number of different things that go on in Flanders that would currently be difficult to replicate in Luton. So one of the things that was happening in Flanders that was such a success was that they had a pay-as-you-throw system. And what that meant was that you actually paid less council tax if you were recycling than if you were sending material for incineration or landfill. And their bring sites or their household waste recycling centres, all of their skips were on scales. And people got a ticket when they entered and their vehicle was weighed, and then it was weighed again on the way out. And each time they put waste in one of these skips, they would get a ticket that weighed how much waste there was, and then they would pay accordingly. And any of the skips that they were putting recyclable materials in, they wouldn't have to pay. It was only the residual that they had to pay for. Now, unfortunately, at the moment, it would require a legislative change in England to bring about a pay-as-you-throw scheme. But there may be some sort of save-as-you-sort scheme that could come in its place. I mean, something else to be aware of is that all local authorities are expected to move towards the harmonization of the way that they collect their waste. So there are materials that some authorities collect currently and some do not. And there is a process that in line with the resources and waste strategy, etc., where all local authorities will be expected to harmonize so that the materials that are collected in Luton will be more or less the same as anywhere else in England. So presumably there's already discussions going on about how those requirements will be met and what investment will be required. And obviously it would be useful as part of that consideration to also factor in how to respond to the prospect of the £1.7 million a year charge for the emissions trading scheme.
One more question, then I'll see if any of my colleagues want to ask some. When we visited the Great Moor site, they were saying how unpopular it was for them to have things like plastics in the mix because it didn't suit them for the way that they operated. Is that common or is that uncommon?
Well, okay, so from the point of view of making a profit on an incinerator, one of the ways that you generate income is through gate fees. And because incinerators are not designed to handle a certain quantity of material, they are designed to handle a certain calorific value of material. What that means is that the higher CV, the higher calorific value, the less you can feed through the incinerator. So because plastic is high carbon, and because plastic is high calorific value when burnt, the incinerator can only cope with so much plastic at a time. And therefore, it's to their advantage to mix the plastic with other materials so that then they can send more through the incinerator to be processed, thereby generating more income and therefore more profit, etc. So from that point of view, they like material that is low enough CV. Again, it can be too low. There is a sort of sweet spot that they're aiming for. So at the moment, they're not trying to eliminate all plastic. They're just trying to balance the plastic with other material. There may be a time in the future where incinerator operators will find it advantageous not to accept any more plastic. But at the moment, that isn't their policy. And of course, generally speaking, once the residual waste has been mixed together, although it's easy enough to remove metals because they're magnetic, so you can use a magnet and you can even use an eddy current to magnetize metals that otherwise wouldn't be magnetic to remove them. There is currently no similar process for simply removing plastic. So they won't remove the plastic if it's been delivered to them, but they like a delivery that combines plastic with other material so that they can maximize their profits. Does that make sense to you as an answer?
Yes, it does. Thank you. I'm
Good,
going to give way in case colleagues want to ask.
Thank you, Councillor Wynne. Councillor Mead.
Thank you. I don't know who I really ought to be addressing this to. Of all the electricity generated in this country from whatever source, what percentage does incineration contribute to that overall total?
An excellent question. If we're talking about energy or if we're talking about electricity, they're two slightly different things. In relation to electricity, which is a subset of all of the energy, my understanding is that 2.9% of the electricity is sourced from incineration or energy from waste plants. And obviously, when you factor in heat exported from plants, but also all of the heat in the form of heat other than electricity, then it would be a much smaller percentage of the total energy. But in terms of the total electricity, I think it's fair to say just under 3%. And I think that is actually what you will find on paragraph 23 on page 15 of the agenda. That was what was being reported, I think, by way of a correction from a suggestion that it was as much as 15%. So my quick answer is about 3% of the electricity.
Thank you.
Yep, good.
Thanks for that. Any other questions or comments? Yeah,
Thank you, Chair. Just to make a couple of observations. We can concur with a lot of the aspirations of UKWin about the resource economy, circular economy, and certainly as council officers, we do lobby government through NORDO, LGA, LARAC, ADEPT, and Solace on all matters, especially the environmental matters, and more importantly, who funds a lot of these changes, whether it's the new burdens legislation or other schemes. The landfill trading scheme, which the gentleman mentioned, and the emission trading scheme are both sort of versions of the same thing. They're not ideal, but it's a fairly blunt instrument that the government tends to use and change, not very often. But the key thing about, I think, the presentation is that the gentleman's correct. Product design, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and others are really pushing that for repairability, reusability, circular economy, because it's very much linear at the moment, as was mentioned. So that's why you see a lot of things appearing in the residual waste, which maybe 10 or 15 years ago you'd have thought we should be able to repair that, we should be able to put a new plug on it. So they are very much key things. In terms of performance, the devolved authorities, Wales and Scotland, have very different legislation, very different focus on how they want to approach things, especially in Wales, where they make investment in facilities based on a government basis, not each individual authority. So it's very much not a level playing field in the UK. And as they've said, some of the legislation, the primary legislation in the UK would need to be changed, even though we're heading down the lines of what's called TEEP, which is consistency in collections. So it's making it technologically, environmentally and economically practical. And that is the basis of trying to move ahead as all authorities in the UK, so that there's that consistency. If you go to another authority about materials collected, the way it's collected. But the key thing, I think, with all of this is the move to prevention and reuse is the primary focus for all councils and residents, hopefully, because that's truly when you will see some of the figures mentioned about the residual waste really dropping and moving to that true circular economy. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? David?
Really, I think this is a request for a further considered report. First of all, the council's view of the 1.76 million a year figure quoted in Shlomo's presentation, it's clearly speculative because of the variable prices that has been mentioned, but it'd be good to have some sort of LBC view of that, and some ideas on the additional costs of additional sorting, in particular, based on the experiment a little while ago of separate food waste collections. Based on the participation rate and all the other issues, it was only carried out in, I think, 2 areas across the town. So how much would that cost extended across the town, assuming the same participation rates? Although clearly, if it was extended, there would need to be some effort to increase participation rates. But that's something you can't speculate on at the moment. But I mean, clearly that would do some of the additional sorting for you. Although, yes, it would come with additional costs of collection, and I accept that. And if there is any, if anyone does have any inspiration on possible additional sources of finance for any of these kind of operations, and whether we could perhaps encourage the local government association to lobby government for additional funding for additional sorting, given the government's clear intention to reduce incineration and landfill. If additional sorting is going to make a considerable contribution to that, then it would be in government's interest to try and finance some of it. So yeah, I think some additional information along those lines would be very helpful. Thank you.
Yes, we can do that, Chair.
Thank you. I don't think there are any other comments or questions. So yeah, thank you, Shlomo, for that interesting presentation and responding to the questions raised.
Great, thank you, Chair, and thank you to everyone there.
Okay, moving on to the next item of the agenda, which is looking at well, sharing thoughts regarding the future agenda items, those being detailed on page 5 of your agenda pack, extended producer responsibility, and the Committee on Climate Change. Any comments or questions on that? David, yeah.
Well, we've clearly got very limited powers over extended producer responsibility, but anyone who could convince manufacturers to reduce the packaging that they use, be interested in hearing from. I do not understand why a tube of toothpaste has to have 3 separate lots of packaging around it. Clearly, that's not something that we can get involved in. But I mean, if Sue and Sean are suggesting that there is room in these 2 areas for us to actually have some influence over the shape of the future contract, then yeah, by all means, let's look at them. I'm already asking myself to what extent additional sorting could be incorporated into a new contract, but that's to come, isn't it, in the future? And I'm aware that Sue has other contractual issues that she wants us to look at as well. So So look, so yeah, as far as I'm concerned, if there is anything in these two areas, then yes, let's have a look at them. But I haven't got any fixed views myself because I frankly haven't got sufficient expertise or knowledge. If anyone else in the room has, then you know, let them share it.
If I could just come back to you, Chair, the extended producer responsibility, which is commonly known as EPR, is where the real push for the future, as you say, the 2 and 3 layers you get at the supermarket, Amazon, the like, and the proposals from the government, which we can circulate, are on the basis of the producer fully funds it. And that's the whole chain, including local authorities, who are usually at the bottom and collect it. And so that's the sort of the real importance of that long term, not only for our contract, but for the 2040 vision, that long term, and how we hope the circular economy will really get the boost, similar to recycling, got a real boost with the landfill tax. So that's the thoughts there. On the evaluation criteria in the new contract for carbon, you've heard UKWin say how important it is, and that is, I think, crucial for Luton, whatever form of contract that we have, is that we have the right evaluation criteria, so that it's not just value for money, though that's important. We do have the things like the social value, we have the carbon and climate come into it, as well as any local specific criteria we want to use. Finance is fairly straightforward, you evaluate on the price, but we need to ensure that whoever we employ contribute to the aims of our 2040 vision, and whether that's becoming carbon neutral town or building an inclusive economy, they are key things.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions on that? Yep.
Sorry, just thank you, Chair. Just following on from what Sean just said about, in particular, Committee on Climate Change and procurement. We, just so you know, we are working quite closely with procurement anyway on carbon in terms of how we move forward to reduce our carbon footprint through procurement, because it is one of the most significant impacts. But I think it would be particularly useful to hear this committee's views, Task and Finish Group's views around some of that as well. So I think it'd be really helpful moving forward to put that emphasis on the new waste contract.
Thank you. Cheers. And I guess just another question is, does any member have any other suggestions as to other agenda items we might want to include in future meetings in addition to these? Silence. Councillor Franks?
Well, yeah, I mean, I've already asked for some stuff on additional sorting and the implications of the trading scheme. Yeah, no, that's it from me, sorry.
On the recycling, on this sorting business, we heard that if we sorted properly, it would create all these jobs. And as we know, jobs are very, very expensive, both in the wages and overheads which go with each job. If we are going to expand our recycling, can you come up with some sort of realistic estimates of how much extra you would get, for what percentage extra recycling you would get? You know, is it a parabolic curve and it sort of tapers off? The more you spend, the less and less you're going to get out of the system. Is there a crossover point where this no longer becomes viable? And yeah, something like that.
Just to answer that, Councillor, there is, because, you know, to have a recycled material, you've had to buy it. You've had to consume it. So the hierarchy is prevention and reuse. So ideally, you have prevention, reuse, and that circular economy. So your recycling is effectively reuse in the circular economy, but there is the law of diminishing returns, because there's only so much recycling in the average recycled bin, and there's only so much recycled product in any material now. You may have noticed things like water bottles and fizzy drinks containers have got thinner and thinner over the years, and again, that is drinks companies trying to maximize their market, but also reduce their effect on their environmental standards. So yeah, but we can have a look and see if there's any industry standards and information, and provide some links. Yeah.
Thank you. So I think that brings us to the end of the agenda. I don't think there's any other comments, so I think we can close the meeting. Thanks everyone for your input. Thank you.